so let me get my calendar.
What do you guys think as far as a preference of room lighting? Do we want to have the room lit up so we can see everybody? I want to make the stage a little bit brighter.
Yes, happily. What do you do? Well, I'm in a parish in Genesee County, small 500 families. Welcome one and all to First United Methodist Church. I'm Doug McMunn. I serve here as host pastor. We welcome you all to this event offered by the Livingston Faith and Race Project. Thank you for being here. We're delighted to host. And thank you to our teams for helping with marketing, security, tech support, and refreshments. Please stay for a snack after the presentation for informal conversations. Please imagine how we might feel if the weight of tonight's topic really rested on our families or in our houses of worship because they've been vandalized, or our families have suffered discrimination or violence because of prejudice. If you have suffered such things personally, we're here trying to understand your pain and this kind of injustice, and we want so much to build a better world here and now. Would you take a moment of silence with us to feel the gravity of purpose for which we're gathered here, and after the silence, I'll offer an opening prayer. O God, who created the sun that shines on all people, give us greater insight into our social community. Make us more curious and more eager to know our neighbors. Bless our guest speaker tonight. Help him share the fruit of his labor with us. Give us receptivity that we may think in fresh ways. Give us humility and a teachable spirit. Give us fruitful and diverse friendships. Move us to better thinking and better actions in the spirit of Jesus, who taught us to be true neighbors and true friends of all. Amen. Would you please welcome our local organizer, Dr. Leo Hannafin.
Thank you, Pastor, and thank you for hosting this event. It's been wonderful, the setup and the organization, and we're really grateful for it. So, good evening. I am the chairperson of the Livingston Faith and Race Project. We're a coalition of people from many different churches or from no church who believe that we are called to love all our brothers and sisters, regardless of the color of their skin or their religion. Our banner defines us. We are the people of faith of Livingston County, united in love for all people. Tonight's event aims at increasing our understanding of the influence of our faith on race relations and vice versa, and to use that understanding to chart a course towards making our community more welcoming and inclusive to people of all races, nations, and religions. As our program indicates, we will first learn from the studies and insights of Dr. Elliot Ratzman. Then 3 local religious leaders will briefly reflect on his wisdom in the context of our community today. And then we will discuss together, all of us, our perspectives that might lead us to a path towards becoming a better community. And lastly, we'll invite you all to participate in upcoming steps forward on that journey. So let's begin. Tonight, to help us better understand, we're fortunate to have with us Dr. Elliot Ratzman. He has taught religion, ethics, and religion in society at 5 universities. He's a noted expert in the confluence of religion with racism, with religious discrimination, and nationalism, and today, even with politics. Now, as a research fellow at the University of Michigan's Raoul Wallenberg Institute, he's completing a book on these areas. He's also part of the national leadership for the Fellowship of Reconciliation USA, the oldest interreligious organization dedicated to war resistance and civil rights. Dr. Ratzman.
Okay, watch this. Thank you for coming here tonight to hear. Perhaps you were intrigued by this topic. Perhaps you have connections to people in this organizing space. Perhaps this is an issue that you've been burning to hear about, to gather with others who are also concerned with questions of race, exclusion, religion, and so forth. I'd like to thank so much the organization, Suzanne Everett, this church for hosting it, the people who are preparing the basics of water and cookies later, and sound and tech, and especially you for coming out here, because I'm going to give you some homework to do after this. Give some things to do. Here I groan. Because we all have a lot of suffering in the world. I've heard about the suffering in this county, the forms of exclusion, its history. And we all have a lot of responsibility for others and others, for our neighbor. To be people of faith, we have to be responsible for others, and it is the role of us collectively to discern what that might look like. And this organization helps us figure out some basic steps to come to our responsibilities in clarity. My role here is split between somebody who studies religion as an academic, as an organizer who works on these issues of race and power and politics, and also as a person of faith. So I wear a little different hats today. I have one little hat on. I'll take it off when I say something like from a sort of secular perspective. We will discern together through question and answer. Now, you probably are going to have a lot of questions. I'm usually fielding lots of questions around how can I be concerned around Palestine, what's going on in Gaza, and also like avoid anti-Semitism. That's the question I get a lot. And we can talk about that after or during the Q&A, but that's coming. So if you're like, I'm here for that, it's coming. Our traditions have a lot of strands and streams to them. The dark side of all of our legacies have been harmful. We are all part of projects, imbricated in projects, that have caused harm throughout history. The Christian traditions are not exempt, certainly. The Jewish traditions are not exempt. The national traditions, our country, in the name of our country, in the name of our religion, in the name of our traditions or our peoples, have caused harm. And one of the ways that this has instantiated itself is something I'm going to help us walk through today, and hopefully to come out to the other side by emphasizing those strands and streams that are liberatory, that speak to the best of our angels, are lit by the Spirit rather than our worst impulses, what you Christians called sin. So I'm going to outline some very quickly, and this is usually a whole semester's worth of stuff, but I'm boiling it down. The contemporary problems, questions about how the Bible shows up in these contemporary problems and how we might understand that. And I'll do a little bit of Bible reading that is drawn from the secular study of the Bible, but also unexpectedly from the Jewish tradition, from whom many of these verses are drawn. And then some solutions to racist and other forms of exclusion uses of the Bible, and then some suggested approaches to reconciliation. How's that sound, everybody? How many here are part of a church community that's, how many here, your pastor or minister or clergy is speaking tonight? Let me ask. Ah, look, not too many. Okay, good. How many here are from Livingston County? How many heard about this through reading something in the newspaper? A few of you. You all know each other, right? Maybe you should take a second real quick and introduce each other. Just for a second. Just say hi to your neighbor. Yeah. Okay, let's not get too social, everybody. All right, well, time for that later. Okay. So here's what I have to share for you. If you could take a look at the screen, and the letters and the words are going to be a little small. I will read some out. We can come back to it and circle back. So don't worry about hustling through reading what I have to share. So a few weeks ago, you may remember Pope Leo said some very anodyne but just and true words in favor of peace and condemning those who would wage war. He quotes Isaiah, "Even though you may make many prayers, I will not listen. Your hands are full of blood." So ornamenting the project and product of Catholic theological thinking about war, quotes Isaiah. In response, also quoting Hebrew Bible, while David made war, there's wars in the Hebrew Bible. And even J.D. Vance said something about the Catholic just war tradition. So now we have a debate over the nature of Scripture and the nature of God, playing out in public life over the policies of our government, the practices of our government. In Israel, also the Bible gets quoted, less than you would think, by the Israeli leaders. After October 7th, Benjamin Netanyahu and other leaders quoted passages from the Hebrew Bible making references to the tribe of Amalek, which in parts of the Bible says you are commanded to blot out. And there's even a verse in Samuel where God is insisting that you wipe out everyone, women and children and so forth. So these genocidal language was evoked as referring to Hamas and maybe the Palestinian people as such as the eternal enemies of the Jewish people. More bad biblical verses. In response, Tucker Carlson, who suddenly discovered sympathy for Arab, Muslim, and Christian peoples, was very angry about the Gaza war, as I think everyone should be, but also started to, in my estimation, blame the wrong sort of analysis, saying that only something alien to Christian civilization could have led to Gaza, that only Jews with their non-Christian spirit could lead to the massacres and atrocities and war crimes of the Israeli state. So this framing of, as you see, the quoting of the Hebrew Bible to justify violence can lead to a temptation for those Christians, this is a blank slide so you can look at me, can lead to the temptation of saying, you know, there's something about that Old Testament that's really bloody, that's very violent, that's very exclusionary, right? And that maybe the Hebrew Bible is something to really downplay and to give them those who hold it in highest regard. That's a dangerous temptation. So you see it a little bit with Tucker Carlson, but you also seeing the Hebrew Bible activities, parts of the Hebrew Bible mobilized by things like Christian nationalism, which models some of its language off of the kingdom of David and Solomon, the wars of Israel against the local populations in the Hebrew Bible, and also justifying all sorts of alleged political setups that you might find in the Hebrew Bible. So how do we, as, let's say, Christians and Jews, manage this if we hold what you call the Old Testament important and sacred as the Word of God, and also have values that come into conflict with what both the text and also these traditions which are mobilizing these texts use? When it comes down to it, what we're looking at is Old Testament stories used by Christian empires, institutions, and actors to explain a whole bunch of things. So I'm going to take you through some history here, mostly focused on the United States. So, for example, colonialism, justified by Christian empires using Old Testament frameworks. We, the colonizer, are the new Israel. You, the conquered, are the Canaanites, the subjected tribes of the stories of the Hebrew Bible. So the Hebrew Bible helped justify the conquest of America. At first, it helped identify who these Native Americans were by the first theory, that's another story, that maybe they're lost tribes of Israel, that maybe these Native Americans are actually Jews. Right? I don't know if anybody have heard about that, right? So when the conquerors who are these people? Well, let's look in the Bible, let's figure them out. Oh, they must be Jews. I think I hear a little Hebrew in that language, or gibberish, maybe some of them circumcised, or, there were some sort of like clues. But after they weren't getting on board, very quickly, they did not become Jews in their minds. They became sort of satanic or pagan worshipers of other gods and idolaters who are fit for conquest and for expulsion or massacre. So the Hebrew Bible served as one template for these Christian empires. We also, in the tragic and terrible story of American racism and the enslavement of Africans of West Africa and brought to the Americas, there comes a point at which Christian imagery and storytelling is mobilized to explain why we are enslaving these black Africans, especially when they convert to Christianity. At first, they were not pursued to be converted, and then eventually they were, and then people ask questions like, why are we enslaving other Christians? And so some of the justifications, it looks like some of my slide got cut off. So the legitimacy of the slave system, it was in the Hebrew Bible, people had slaves, also in the New Testament, there's a few verses, but I'm gonna skip that. Black inferiority was justified by the legend, or let's say the story, of the curse of Ham. Has anyone heard of the curse of Ham before tonight? Oh, all those who haven't, I'm so excited to expose you to this terrible moment. So the curse of Ham was the way in which Christians, often Protestants, explained why they were enslaving black Africans. And part of it, and I'll take you through it, is also sort of melded with the curse of Cain. And both of these are in Genesis, right? I know a lot of you are Bible school dropouts and maybe don't know these references, but this is in the book of Genesis. And then white supremacy itself, it ends up being justified by verses from the Bible, including punishment of violence for interracial coupling, and later apartheid and other forms of exclusion drawn from middle parts of the Hebrew Bible, the histories of Israel and their tensions with the tribes around them. Okay, so let me just give you a deep dive for just a few minutes. The curse of Ham. It's in Genesis 9. You have 3 sons of Noah, right? And there's a curse on one of the sons who disobeys him. That's another story. And part of the curse reads that he will be enslaved to his brothers. So the cursed son and his descendant will be enslaved to his brothers. So what the slaveholding South does is use that verse to justify why we're enslaving these black Africans, is because they are descended of the son of Ham. They're the descendants of Ham, the cursed son of Noah. Does that make sense? I mean, maybe you're like, it doesn't make sense, but I mean, what I'm saying makes sense. And then, because, the reasons of history and confusion, this also gets confused with the curse of Cain. Cain killed his brother Abel, and it says in the Bible, he's marked by God, so others won't kill him. And the interpretation of the mark of Cain was very easily collapsed into black skin, right? It's not like everybody had a Bible in their pocket. Oh, wait, let's check it in. Like people are oral cultures and sort of remembering these things vaguely, but also that the curse of Cain and the interpretation of this mark becomes a source of mischief later. So a lot of this has to do with the tribal politics of ancient Israel, which I can talk more about. So I'm giving you illustrations right from the source here. Allegedly, the sons of Noah. Look how Ham is represented. Right? That's not real, right? This is propaganda stitched together by a white supremacist form of Christianity. Right? It's not like, oh, we found the pictures of the sons of Noah on an ancient Egyptian tablet or something. So we have the curse of Ham. There's the verse. Now, the reference is to Canaan, actually. It's not to Ham, which is why that word Cain and Abel, gets collapsed into the Canaanites. It sounds alike. Right? That's another story I can tell you later. Cain being the murderer of Abel. Okay, and then later, some of this is worked into really like what you might think is fringe forms of Christianity. Nazi Christianity, which reworked Christianity into a race-based religion where Jesus was not Jewish, right? Jesus and his early followers were all worshipers of the God of Israel, what we might today call Jewish, right? So it was an inter-Jewish dispute. But the Nazi project was very clever in figuring out a theology of how to make Jesus actually have Aryan heritage, European heritage. And also as a project of nationalism, of militarism, of racism. They invented the term racism, and anti-Judaism. Now, in America, you have this group called Christian Identity, a loose association of white supremacist churches and forms of racialized Christianities, which are descendants of both the Nazi-fied form of Christianity, but also the slave-holding South version of Christianity. They sometimes insist the Bible is the history of white people, and not everybody, not all peoples. Interesting. So the story of Israel is just about white people. Actually, that the tribes of Israel are actually British sometimes, or there's different stories. You're all giggling. I know that you should be. It's ridiculous, right? But also, this is the way that these texts have been mobilized for racialized purposes, racism. Okay. There's an image from Nazi Germany, the way in which the government was sort of absorbing and commandeering the images of Christianity. Now, some Nazis were against Christianity altogether. They thought it was a religion of kindness and mercy and loving your neighbor and loving all people. And they thought that wasn't squaring well with Nazism. So there were anti-Christian Nazis, but there were a lot more who were just regular Christians who had to be managed through this new ideology. They tried to mess with the Catholic Church, by the way, and the Catholic Church, to its credit, wasn't having any of it. You can't mess with the DNA of our theology. Right? Okay, now the Hebrew Bible has also been surprisingly mobilized by Christians to justify anti-Semitism and to say that Israel is actually cursed, it's lost its way, that they quote the prophets who are really complaining about the other kingdom, the kingdom of Judah, kingdom of Israel, saying you disregard the poor, God doesn't listen to your prayers. So isolated verses get mobilized as well to essentialize Jews and Judaism, and then reworked and rewoven into the growing Christian movement over the first few centuries. Now in Israel today, we're seeing a mutation, I'm sure some of you have been following this, of a type of Judaism that's taking a second look at the book of Joshua, all the conquest stories, and taking a second look at where the borders of the promised land are or should be, and rethinking how Judaism's relationship is to the state, to violence, to excluding non-Jews in the state. And this is a new endeavor, because for 1,500 years, Judaism has been a pacifist religion. Jews would not serve in the armies. Jews did not have a culture of violence or martial skills. And that the role of Jews for 1,500 years has been for people to study the Holy Scriptures and to live a Jewish life. This is starting to change, including the desire to rebuild a third temple over and against Jewish traditions. So this might be part of the solution, what I just said, but what you're seeing here is also part of the problem. A small but growing, about mutating form of Judaism, which is now taking up arms. And so this Iran war is in some ways can be seen as the first war of a kind of radical fundamentalist Judaism and a radical fundamentalist Christianity and a radical version of Islam. So you have religious radicalism all at war with each other, where the voices articulating the war in Iran are Jewish, Christian, and against a radical Muslim regime. And that's scary. Okay, so you're like, all right, this is really bumming me out on the Hebrew Bible. Maybe we should get rid of it. I want to. That's the first heresy, Marcion's heresy, right? But here's the thing. One way to understand this is that the way that Jews read those verses is totally different than the way Christians read them. Jews read those verses as, like, for example, the wars against the peoples of the land of Canaan, as metaphors for the overcoming of vice. That these people don't exist, or they didn't exist, multiple interpretations. That the harsh violence isn't actually the violence. That King David was a terrible person, but he wrote great psalms, and that's why we revere him. So Judaism has a way of understanding these verses and neutralizing the violence in them. And Judaism's not the only tradition that does this. When Mahatma Gandhi did his commentary on the war poem called the Bhagavad Gita, he also used the strategy of saying, this really didn't happen, it's not historical, and actually these are just metaphors for the inner struggle against vice. Did you know that? So how do pacifists read their own scriptures when they get violent? You make it into a metaphor. And that's one way of doing it. So Judaism never held these verses or the wars of Israel in high regard. It's really the first 5 books of Moses and not really the histories of Israel. They are not often understood as actually very historically accurate. And if I take off my yarmulke, we also know from archaeology that some of the stuff in the middle part of the Hebrew Bible absolutely did not happen, according to the archaeologists. Right? So that's another way of that's another way of dealing with this. The other thing is, and I want to introduce you a phrase, maybe some of you know this, there's a moment that there's an argument where the early Christian church goes from being a besieged pacifist group of hippie spiritualists, I usually get a laugh for that, but not in this crowd, who are persecuted and walk knowingly and proudly to their death, to the moment it becomes empire under Constantine. One theologian calls it Constantinian Christianity. It was the moment where Christianity becomes imbricated in politics, in empire, in violence. It changes the very nature of Christianity. And there have been a tussle within first the Catholic Church and then later all the Christian groups over what is the nature and essence of Christianity. Judaism is going through its Constantinian moment now over the last 60, 70 years of gaining state power and the religious element of Jewish nationalism gaining even more power since the 1970s. So for all the horrors that we see in Gaza, or the way in which Judaism is articulated in a marital way, we have to understand that Christianity has been wrestling with this for centuries. It's the result why you have peace churches, why you have social justice committees of the various denominations, mainline denominations, wrestling with the history of Christian violence and Christian power. Okay, I'm going to wrap this up here in a second. Now, for those of you who are just like, I don't want to hear about history and what actually happened, but let's just look at the Bible. There are verses in the Hebrew Bible that are clear, could have clearly been mobilized for anti-racist purposes, but we're not, because there was too much to gain by reading it into that slavery was definitely part of this setup. The people that noticed these verses, of course, are the black church and used the reading of the Bible against the slave-owning religion. They recognized that Moses has an Ethiopian wife, that there are praiseworthy comments about Ethiopians, also just translated as Cushite, and so forth. So there are anti-racist verses, they just weren't mobilized. So I want to end with some solutions and good practices based on my experience as an organizer dealing with people who have very much different beliefs than me. The first of all is we can't demonize those people. We have to see them as fallen, maybe lost in the sauce of their sin, but not necessarily a settled project, that people are always changeable. And for those of you who we think that we have good values and that we're on the right side of history, the right side of divinity, we have to remember that even this confirmation bias affects us. So when we're engaging with people who are, let's say, already in this toxic ideology of exclusion and violence, that they don't have to be there forever, and we have great historical examples of people walking away from that, of societies changing, and whole cultures and readings of the Bible, for example, is being transformed. The Catholic Church at Vatican II, since World War II, a lot of reworking and reconciling with the Christian world and the Jewish world. So, but my focus on the Bible here tonight is to emphasize that we have to understand that the Bible is always being mobilized for certain purposes outside of the Bible, right? There is no raw reading of the Bible. It's not the IKEA directions for a good Christian life or living a good Jewish life. We all come to it with traditions and framework and interpretation that helps us bolster and weave out of the Bible a culture that we want to call our own. We who work on these anti-violence movements weave the Bible into a culture against violence. We emphasize those verses, right? Those who wanted to mire in the slave-holding, race-based Christianity emphasize other things and repurpose them. When we know the history of these verses, especially the way the Jews have used them, used and understood those episodes, this is one way out of this, to realize that we're always stuck in that contextual fight. Out-organizing Christian nationalism. And by Christian nationalism, I don't mean pride in country or patriotism, but rather the idea that Christians should dominate the country, and certain types of Christians, always certain types of Christians should dominate the country. And that, and maybe with some right-wing Jews as junior partners, right? And like my friend Mayor Solveichik, who spoke in the Capitol the other day at this jamboree of Christian nationalism that happened last week. And I think it's important for we, people of faith, to out-organize them, and not just to engage people lovingly and soul to soul, but also institutionally, and using the force of our person-to-person and institution-to-institution connections to make sure that we are committed to a multicultural, multi-faith America to put up the democratic values. And it's not just good for religious minorities, Jews, Muslims, Hindus, and so forth. It's also good for Christianity. Because once the state gets in the business of pushing Christianity, nothing good comes from it. And you can say that nothing good is either the secularism of Northern Europe, where nobody goes to church anymore, I hear, or the toxic violence of a state-run church, as we saw from apartheid South Africa to Nazi Germany to other places where there's state capture of the religion. You all with me? So on that, I look forward to hear the wisdom of your local, my colleague clergy, and hope that we have a good discussion and conversation after this. So thank you, everybody, for having me.
Hello. Yes. We are fortunate to have three distinguished religious leaders from our community to help us bring this wisdom to Livingston County here and today. And we'll start with Pastor Ken from Grace Lutheran down the street.
Thanks, Leo. Thank you for being here. I drove up and I was just really surprised, and now I look out and see so many people. The first part of overcoming and out-organizing is to show up to things like this, to educate ourselves, to get better able to mobilize and push back when racism rears its ugly head, or any of the isms, for a matter of fact. I was reminded when I was reading your brief that you sent us, Doctor, of the Good Samaritan story. And we all know it, I believe. But it's very much akin to what we need to propose for ourselves. Which one do we want to be? Certainly not the person laying on the side of the road, but sometimes we will be. Or we'll know somebody, or a loved one will be that person laying on the side of the road. Sometimes we'll have somebody walk in on a Monday, a Tuesday, a Wednesday, or a Sunday that's different than us, that has a whole life, and much of it could be filled with pain. It's up to us to stand there in that gap and love that person. So for me, all I have to say tonight is we need to love harder. We need to love harder. We need to hug everybody and say hello and mean it. We need to not judge. We need to love. I always tell the story when I went to seminary, a hard part of my learning was when you were all by yourself, a lot of it. And I can remember struggling for a time with the LGBTQIA community and where that stood for me in relationship to the Lord. I mean, my worldview was totally against that lifestyle or any of those lifestyles. So what do I do in that case? And it was certainly clear to me, and you could probably all identify in this room, I knew that God spoke and said, do not judge, because you are too simple a man to make any sense out of judgment. We can't judge. We have to, our first objective in any relationship should be like the Good Samaritan. Just go and help. Go and help. Hug, love, care for each other. And I mean, the Howell community, my wife and I have always really enjoyed it. It, for what we have seen, has been so nice and embracing and loving. But I have to tell you, that isn't the only part of Howell. There is a part of Howell that hurts people. It's up to us to figure that out. Leo, this new organization that you're forming is so important. It's so important. And we need to support the organization so that we can mobilize better, quicker, right? So that's my love.
Thank you. You've met Pastor Doug McMunn, so here he is.
As a Christian and as a pastor and as an American, I grieve whenever these isms are mixed in with religion in dysfunctional and harmful ways. And I can mostly, I think, speak to the racism of the three isms we named for tonight's program, but all of them are on my heart. In college, I became friends with Benny. I was raised on on a family farm in Michigan, a white dominant community, almost totally vanilla. And I've been pastoring in churches all my life that have been almost entirely comprised of white people. I met Benny in college, and I assumed that Benny would probably pastor in a black church, and I would probably pastor in a white church. And the very fact that we had those assumptions about ourselves reveals that there was an implicit prejudice and implicit racism within us. And I've found 40-some years later, it hides from me. My own racism hides from me. And it comes out in little discoveries. Oh, that's coming out of my prejudice. And I know by observation of other people that that's how it operates in many of them as well. We don't know what we don't know about our own prejudice. Our church bishops started making cross-racial, what they called cross-racial appointments. The Fowlerville Church, just to the west of us, United Methodist, welcomed Reverend Tom Tarpley. Maybe some of you met Tom. They had a great experience together. And this summer, that same church will welcome Reverend DJ, whose heritage is Korean, an opportunity for the church to model love for all people. I always hoped someday I would pastor in a diverse community and church, but I've spent my whole life in white communities, white churches, overwhelmingly. And if Benny, my college friend, were appointed to any of the churches I've served, thankfully, many people would welcome Benny. Praise God. But some would still ask, will a black pastor be accepted in our community? I'm glad our pastors now are required to read and learn about anti-bias, anti-racism. I feel most awakened by Isabel Wilkerson's book, Caste. How many of you are familiar with Caste? I recommend it. Her research and stories of real people show that America has been shaped by a hidden caste system. 8 pillars of caste perpetuate a rigid hierarchy. It's hidden from us many times, but it's there. Human rankings and the resulting injustice. Finally, I feel further awakened by Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow. How many are familiar with that one? A smaller number. She documents racial prejudice throughout our criminal justice system. She says black people and white people are treated differently under observation, as suspects, when arrested, when charged, when represented in court. We are treated differently when convicted, whether innocent or guilty, different conviction rates, whether when we're sentenced, when we're in prison, when we're paroled. And upon release, we face unequal employment opportunities, unequal compensation, and we could go on. So her book's thesis is, we outlawed chattel slavery, but quickly replaced it with Jim Crow laws. Then we outlawed Jim Crow laws, but replaced it with a continuing criminal justice system where racial inequality can be controlled and perpetuated. Hence the book's title, The New Jim Crow. I'm blind to my own complicity with these isms. They live in my subconscious and in our collective subconscious. Habits of thought, sometimes inherited, perpetuate inequality. So I must do anti-bias, anti-racism work. The acronym we use is ABAR. To counter my own racism, I have to do this work. Just as addicts must do recovery work to counter their addictions. May God save us all.
Amen. And now my past pastor, who was at St. Mary Magdalene for over 25 years, Father Dave Howell. No relation to the community.
No, because everyone knows that Howell is owned by the McPhersons, you know. But in any case, I came to Howell first in 1977 and spent my first year here on the other side of the county, and then came back again in 93 for 26 years. And so it's been interesting watching Livingston County change over these years. I'm going to say initially a lot of the people that came, that settled in Livingston County, starting in the 70s, were people fleeing Detroit. And, you know, they were just looking for a better life for their kids. And we all know that that's code, you know, and they had that, and, you know, it continued down through the years. And I noticed that, especially that, you know, it's one of those things that people tended to notice if there was anyone of color, you tended to see them right away, if they were on the street, whatever. And I found that I was doing that along the way as well, which really bothered me. And one of the things that I loved about retiring was I moved to Genesee County. And it's very different up there. And I'm going to say it was like the third day I had lived in Genesee County, I just said, I like it here better. Because there was just a mixture of people. And it just was normal. That was just normal, which is kind of the way it should be. You know, and you mentioned that, you know, where you came from. I came from out of a Detroit culture. My family were all East Siders, but there was, at least in part of my family, a real racial prejudice that was clear. And my parents, when we were still small, spoke to my grandfather and said that if he was going to talk that way around us, that they weren't going to be able to bring their children around him anymore. And it changed the way he would talk because he wanted to see his grandchildren. And it was a story that I was told several times later in life, and it really affected me that there are ways of changing people. And we need to do that because the reality is that big programs rarely work. It's always one-on-one. Back at Mary Magdalene, we had a men's group that met every other Saturday, and we had one gentleman who inevitably, we studied the Sunday scriptures, which always had an Old Testament reading, a New Testament reading, and then a gospel reading. And so, you know, when studying the Hebrew scriptures, inevitably, this guy would say, oh, I hate these readings. You know, I don't like that part of the Bible. I really don't. And I used to kid him, and I said, you know, wait a minute. First of all, we can't eliminate that. That was, as you mentioned, the earliest heresy of the church, Marcionites, who said, you know, we didn't need the Old Testament. We didn't need the Hebrew scriptures. Well, the gospel doesn't make sense without them. But the other thing that's true is that if you read the Hebrew scriptures, there's a vast difference between the early days and the prophets. And when people say to me, well, you know, Jesus was not like the Old Testament, I go, no. He was the very product of the Old Testament. He was the evolution of that because there was a growing process people of faith have gone through, that all of us have to go through. I'm going to guess that you people in your lifetime act now differently than you did when you were younger. I do. You know, I hope I've grown up. I still have a long way to go. I'm only 75, and so I'm hoping that either I will have this growth before I die, or you know, God will finish what God started. But in any case, as I've grown up over the years, I realize that the same happens in Scripture. You know, there's a growth process among people of faith. And it really is, I think, an important thing that we need to invite people to grow. Because the Bible can be used as a club. You and I know that. And I've heard people do that, and I just try to be patient and say, that's not what that's saying. You're taking it as it's literally saying not what it means, which is the rabbinic tradition, is they always try to find the meaning as opposed to what it simply says. And that's what we have to invite people to do again and again. The last thing I'm going to say is something that came to me in prayer the other day. I was praying about this and thinking, you know, Lord, give me some words, give me some words. And for whatever reason, the acronym DEI came to mind. which is kind of a verboten phrase in some circles. You know, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I thought about that and I thought, oh, DEI. In Latin, the word is Dei, which means of God.
Thank you. Thank you all. Now, Elliot will lead a discussion amongst all of us. Oh, you don't need that. Okay. Yeah.
How are you guys doing out there, by the way? You ready to talk? You ready to ask some questions? I got two people I got to thank. I didn't thank them at the beginning. First, Michael Arnold, who shepherded me from Ann Arbor here tonight because my car's dead, and his family for taking me in out of the chaos, and Dr. Leo Hannafin, who how to deal with all my tsuris, we say in Yiddish, over the last few weeks and months, and so we really should give him a round of applause, please. Great. So I'm sure you all have a lot to say and a lot of questions. I'm not going to be one of those speakers that says just ask a question. But if you got a statement, I'm going to try to keep it sharp. So, and by the way, disagree with me. Like, I love, that's important. That's where we learn from each other.
Suzanne has a microphone so people can be heard.
Yeah, raise your hand. As a professor, I know you got to wait 12 seconds, so, which feels interminable, but.
Is this on? Yeah. I agree. I agree with Father Dave that Howell has changed. But has it really? It has grown way more than I ever thought it would because the Ku Klux Klan was here. I've been out here 50 years in Brighton. Has it really changed, or has it just become more white people? I don't see any black people in Howell, hardly ever. I see more and more people, but they're all white. So it's changed, but has it really changed? I don't know.
I have a friend from Divinity School who lives near Detroit, and he goes, Brother Elliot, that's Klan country out there, right? He was surprised this was happening, delighted too. But yes, you will have problems. Question is, how do you deal with them? And as Christian communities, you talk a lot about love and loving the neighbor, but what that means in practice has to be justice. It has to be discerned in policy and interpersonal relations. It has to be asked of larger questions, too, about economics, affordability, welcoming. And so there's a lot to figure out. And our hearts and minds should be turned, of course. But we have to figure out the logistics and the practical, pragmatic details of how to be acting rightly to create the beloved community. There's a long path and we have a lot of directions. So one question is, what is to be done? And this is a question you all can discern together as residents of this county. There's a lot of good ideas out there. But also entertain questions about the Bible and religion. But
we have some friends who happen to be a black couple who've been in this county for a long time. And Reverend Howell, they came from Detroit wanting to raise their children in a better situation. But they have come to the conclusion that they're still minorities and they choose to keep to themselves. They're very proud of who they are. They're very strong individuals, but they don't want to rock the boat.
there was a hand up here.
Hi, I'm from Ann Arbor, Michigan, and it's a very diversified community. And so I have a sister-in-law who's up here in Howell, and she kept asking me to move up here because I'm getting older, and she wanted to be where she could help me if the need came. And I said, I do not want to move to Howell, Michigan. I said, there's a light of, it's all white. I can't deal with that. And it was the next day after that, they'd have that great big display of, anti-racism that was given in Howell. And right after that, immediate following, was a whole group of people that came in and did washing the sidewalks to get rid of all these people, the essence of those people that had come in and done this horrible demonstration against, people of all different colors. And I thought, well, that's a change coming. That's a good thing. That's the kind of thing you want to see. And it says people are trying to change. And I think that's really important, because those little things like that are very, very important to see changes that are happening around. And you want that.
Dr. Leo, what was the march last year that there was only 25 people behind your banner? What was it called?
We're calling it a unity march. Last 4th of July, we invited people to walk behind this banner as a demonstration that we are changing in this community, and so we had 25 people. This year, we're going to do it again, and we want at least 100 people. In fact, I bet if all of you came and brought one more person, we'd have more than 100 people.
Okay, so as a Jew, I'm going to get very detailed here. How many of here would be willing to walk on this? Raise your hand. So you would all be walking together, right? That's a very good progress and a very good stand. And it's some moral minimum that you could be doing. So for those of you willing to walk behind that banner, there you go. Make sure to sign up and respond when the calls come.
You'll have an opportunity at the end to sign up.
And you all see each other again, if you haven't seen each other. Other comments or questions about text?
Thanks for the presentation. It was excellent. I have difficulty, I think, within my own family, the different ways people worship and the different churches they may attend, and some of them, I think unbeknownst to them, really, are in places that there's a real danger of the white nationalist agenda. And I just find that, and I am in a conundrum sometimes personally about how to, work within the family, to, like you said, to have to confront, but in different ways. And I liked the part about focusing on maybe, like not calling people out, but focusing on maybe things that we can say that are good. But I wondered if there were any advice people have about that, because we know it's hard within families these days with politics, but a lot of the politics are tied into the religion. Like their politics are based on where they're worshiping and what they're being told. And people that really think they're doing God's will, it's a conundrum. So I don't know if you have any words.
Let me note, too, that the Bible does not cause these systems to come into existence. They justify them. They come afterwards. You reach into your religious culture and you weave the politics and the system that benefits you. So it's not like people read the Hebrew Bible and said, Eureka, let's do slavery and racism and colonialism, right? It's that these things were already on the move and there was a need to justify them. Same thing, I think we should think about Christian nationalism. Why is Christian nationalism falling on receptive ears? What are the underlying conditions? These are human beings, they're not demons. So what is it that is appealing to Christian nationalism or white nationalist Christianity? And it has to do probably with feeling alienated, culture's changing, questions about gender is changing, the makeup of the country is changing, feeling diminished because of economics, which affect a lot more people than just the white working class. And so there has to be empathy and solidarity in the way in which we engage with others who are different. It's not everybody's job. But years ago, I spent the summer reading memoirs by former white nationalists to see if there was any patterns here. And I can tell you, people change. There are ways in which people change. The organized hate groups, the problem is they're so very visible, and they do terrible things and spray paint things and burn crosses. But it's really about figuring out how we work people in, and with family disputes, that's really toxic too, because family members feel comfortable letting down their, I don't have any hair to let down, but to let down your hair and to say what you really think. And so it's not the right form. So what are the practical steps? Patience, And also to remember, you have to be an active listener and to deeply listening to people. And these are the people I want to talk to. I mean, it's easy to talk to people who are like, oh, I want to be not racist. Okay, but I'm actually interested in talking to people who feel like they have some sort of stake in the Christian nationalist project. And I think all change comes through relationship building. This is what my rabbi, Saul Alinsky, teaches, that change comes through relationships. And the rest is logistics. There was a question.
Go out there, somebody else.
Oh, who was it?
Yesterday, my doorbell rang, and it was the younger sibling of one of my classmates from the graduating class of '61 in Fowlerville. He was handing out political literature, and he made the statement, you know, people talk about the right and the left, but what really is the opposite of right? It's wrong. And he told me about this candidate and the religious background of this candidate and how he knew the parents of this candidate. And I thought, you're worshiping the same God that I am. What part of God's love do you not understand? And what can I say to you to crack that open enough that you can see there is something else, because there's so many shades of gray.
Well put, well put. And we also remember we have to learn from everybody. If we're going to be effective in doing the work of justice, we have to listen to why people say what sounds like kind of trickery, propaganda things. Because there are reasons, they're human reasons.
Well, one of the issues, I think, with Livingston County is it's very expensive to live here. And I've read articles where we transport workers from Flint, where these workers can afford to live. And they're diverse, and they come down here and work at factories. And I'm now of Ascension, and I see a lot of people that aren't doing well, and it's pretty tough to find affordable housing in Livingston County. I was wondering, what does the Bible say about inequality and opportunity for people to help solve those problems?
All right, that's a big question. It requires a very short answer, because I am short. The first thing is, I think my friend Shane Claiborne says that the New Testament speaks of poverty, maybe it's both Old Testament and New Testament, more than anything, that the concern for the poor outweighs all sorts of opportunities for entrepreneurship that a Wharton School graduate might read into the Bible, right? But it also requires discernment and practical wisdom. And so how do you get affordable housing? How do you arrange that? What are the mechanisms whereby enacting your love for the neighbor actually has a stern footing? And so the question is not so much how as a tourist into Christianity, I see with new eyes, as all tourists do, things that the locals don't. And like, if you were to pick up the New Testament, it's like, oh my God, this group will never survive the first century, because they're just like, they're sharing everything in common, they're loving each other, right? This is some hippie, small S socialist commune form of religion, radically different from the Roman values, the Spartan values surrounding them, the military values. And so I think Christians, instead of asking what does the Bible say, what do Christian communities have to say? And what can Christian communities do to enact that neighbor love? To put what's the term, the muscle on these rattling bones, right? To resurrect a community, you have to figure out what are the steps you have to take, and not just have goodwill or fond feelings. So in terms of now, let me just remind everybody, last week's thing on the mall was about the Jubilee. The Jubilee is about the radical redistribution of land, wealth, and status that allegedly maybe never happened, but happens every 49 years. When are Christians, well, that's in the Old Testament, that's negated. Right? That's the convenient way to do that. So when is that redistribution revolution, which is biblically mandated, according to the Hebrew Bible, going to happen? So people conveniently forget that, conveniently forget the tithing to the poor that's enacted. If you want to go the biblical route, if you want to go what I see as the more powerful route, which is well-meaning Christian peoples coming together as communities to figuring out the problems with evidence-based precedent and practices. That would be, to me, how you enact that neighbor love that the Bible calls you to. It's no mystery. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You just have to share common stories and interact with difficult people. But you're all church-going people, so you know what that's like.
So about 15 years ago, I befriended a person of color, and which is unusual because I'm out in white man's land here. But that's the first time I even thought about race, just because I lived in a white bubble all my life. When I did start learning about race and prejudice, like even slavery, my first inclination was, well, I'm from the North, I'm not one of them. And then when you find out that the North had slaves too, well, I'm half Finnish, the Finns don't have them. It's like denial, you know, it's like, oh, I don't want to identify. But the truth of the matter is, woke's kind of like a stupid phrase. You know, you don't just all of a sudden become aware that something's wrong, and it's like Oprah's aha moment, because it's more like an onion. If you're really going to get real about it, it's not just saying, you know, like, okay, I'll march or whatever. But it's like an onion where it's layer after layer after layer after layer. And anybody that lives in the United States, I don't care where you live, it's like air pollution. No matter where you live, air pollution's affecting your lungs. Maybe it's a little worse, you know, in some areas than others, but hello, all of you have air pollution in your lungs. And that's kind of the way racism is. A lot of people, I think, don't want to get honest with themselves and really do the work themselves. And I think that is critical. And then also, obviously, figuring out, like, you know, get rid of your own stupidity and educate other people as you go along, that sort of thing. But it takes more than just, you know, than just sitting here. There is a lot as Christians that we are called to do. Jesus said that there was goats and there was sheep. And he was talking about how I was hungry, you didn't feed me, thirsty, in jail, in the hospital, where the hell were you guys? And then they're looking at him and saying, well, when were you ever hungry, thirsty, in jail, sick, whatever? And he was saying, when you did or didn't do it to the least of these, my brethren. And I think that's very critical. I think in a capitalist society, we're just acting like the more we get, you know, the better we are as people, and that's BS, you know? Anyway,
Thanks.
that's all, my 2
No,
cents
great.
worth.
Great comments, and I want to add to that a little as well, that there are a lot of things to be done. And as, let's say, white privileged people, many of you might say, I don't want to feel guilty. It's not about guilt. It's about recognizing responsibility. You're in a position to help. You're in a position, like that Samaritan, to take in that injured Israelite. And yes, reading books is important. Talking to actual people is important. Figuring out amongst yourselves what the problems are in a society. I want to emphasize it's not just interpersonal, not about just love, it's also about structures and justice. It's about understanding why people come to the hate that they do. It's not just bad education, it's also the weather patterns of economics and cultural change. And to see how we can fit in and intervene in a way that lessens that toxicity, that gets rid of that structural creation of that pollution, as you used as a metaphor. And I think that's a very important and difficult path. But there are things to do, so much to do. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. Nobody's giving me any questions about the Bible except for that one question. Really. What's about-
Leo, how much time do we have left for Q&A? Okay.
I just feel like a lot of people who have strong feelings of racism or prejudice are really coming from a place of fear, that they're afraid that they will become the minority. They will become, if all these other people come in from other countries or come in and take our jobs or do better than me, then I become the minority. And it's really coming maybe from a place of fear.
Thank you. It's very insightful. And if I may borrow a phrase from the great Lutheran figure Bonhoeffer, like, we also have to remember that we who are doing some of this work already, we might also have a bit of cheap grace here because we haven't come out of and overcome the problems and the forces that keep people mired in these hateful ideologies and creates that fear. Because many of us don't have that same fear. We're culturally open or welcoming. And so I think we have to account for that our grace that is cheap and we didn't earn that. And so to be a little more sympathetic. Why? Not just let people off the hook. It's to be better organizers for justice.
Just this morning, I was reading about a social scientist named Jonathan Haidt. He talks about how systems create and perpetuate all the things we're talking about. And the way he put it is like you're on an elephant. The elephant moves first. You're on an elephant, the elephant moves. So you're seeing this, the elephant moves, now you're seeing this. And then you have to find ways to justify the fact that you're going along with this. And then the elephant moves again, and now you're seeing something different. You're still on the elephant. You have to find ways to justify this. And that was so profound to me because I think probably a lot of us have wondered, how do people go on, condoning this? Or things that they say they would not condone this, but now they are because the elephant moved. The system is the elephant. And I want to go back and read this over and over again because it's just made me think about what can I do to encourage people to look in a different direction, even though they're still on the elephant. Like we talked about, inviting people to gently invite people to examine, what they're seeing. So I really want to find ways to encourage people to, stop looking at that, look over here. I don't know, it's just really given me a lot to think on.
We want to give the panelists another go with the mic.
Can you comment on the student body that you encounter at the University of Michigan on religion and race? Is there a hunger among many students to learn about religion and race, or have they overwhelmingly written off religion as dysfunctional and destructive? Is there any hope in them that religion might be used to help?
It's a big question. I don't know. There's a lot of students at the University of Michigan, and only recently have they created a kind of office of interfaith engagement. And I'm listening in on some of these conversations. I can tell you what we have done. We've pioneered at the Rollo Wallenberg Institute in cooperation with some faculty, really great dialogue games. We're using something called Photo Voice, which already existed, and also a card deck, a humanist, not humanist, but like a kind of tolerance play deck in order to get students to talk to each other about deep, important issues. Cutting through the social media frenzy and getting down to how does one be in the world, where does one come to? The practices of dialogue across differences has shown to break down barriers and to frustrate prejudices. We have groups like Better Angels that's out in the world doing things like this. So one of the things might be to sit down with people who you disagree with in a structured dialogical environment. That's what I could take that. We're sort of experimenting with that at University of Michigan. But, you know, we're not talking about a lot of numbers here, maybe a few hundred people out of how many thousands of students.
Yeah, wanted to address what you were talking about, ma'am. So we have, with the ELCA in our Senate, which is the Southeast Michigan Senate, we have a team of people that teach on anti-racism. And that goes into a lot of the story of how it developed and how all of these systems developed. You'd love the training. Yeah, Leo, I can put you in touch with that team or that group, because that would be great for us as a group to spend a Saturday morning or a Saturday afternoon with them and really understand it, because it gives you a base, a foundation in which we can now all of a sudden understand each other a little bit better. And it also breaks down the fear that's out there, you know, that fear of the different person.
So who has a really good question or comment we want to end this on? Your hand went up really fast.
I think we owe you a question about, it's a biblical question. So you pointed out quite well that the Bible is used to justify a lot of isms, racism, and what have you. So in your opinion, what is a better way to use the Bible in changing what we want to change?
Okay, great question. That sounds like more like my lane. So the first thing I want to say is that there's no raw reading of the Bible. I mean, some of your religious traditions think that's true, but they're always encrusted with a culture in a way that shapes what passages matter and what don't, right? This is true, I think, of all Christianity. Judaism is just more explicit in the way that it manages how the Bible works within its religious structure. The first thing you all have is congregations and denominations, or non-denomination, also a kind of denomination, that structure and discipline the way you read the Bible in light of, call it what you will, biblical values, the light of Christ, the inner light in the Quakers. And so that frames how we see it. It's important to realize that, for example, for Jews, we don't have to take the Bible as historically accurate, like it's Thucydides. Thucydides is not historically accurate. Like Ken Burns, what you're reading is the expression of humans trying to understand the divine, and also a particular people trying to understand its whacked out history of being conquered and conquering others. Right? Our suffering did not ennoble us, wrote James Baldwin in 1967. But suffering enables a reading of the Bible for certain things to come to the surface and to make and speak to the people who are poor, the poor, as in the Catholic tradition calls it. So I think reading the Bible with those eyes, the eyes of the suffering, the excluded, the marginal, that's an interesting way of interpreting the Bible, rather than the interpretation done by the slave owner who sees it for their own material benefit, and rather to read it from the bottom, from the third world, as we used to say. So I think that might be one practical strategy. The other thing, take this off, is, look, the Bible is a historical document composed over 1,000 years by many different authors for different purposes and different audiences. And so as it's come down to us, right, we hold some of its essence sacred, but there's a lot you all ignore, and that's fine. It should be ignored. What matters is how you are with each other in your congregations and in your traditions. And the rest is commentary from those who read the Bible from within your group, and also historical scholarship about what these things might have meant. And I always start my classes on these things with the most confounding verses in the Bible that nobody pays attention to, which makes up the title of my book on Judaism and race, Zipporah's Knife. So if you want to read the Bible in its craziness, Exodus 4:24-27 will knock your socks off. But better that you read the Bible through the eyes of the oppressed, and read the Bible with those who are feeling excluded. What Howard Thurman said, those with their backs against the wall. Right? And if you're not sure where those folks are, you're not too far from these other counties. So I think that might be a good place to start, to engage with even people in your own denominations or strains living in Wayne, or I still don't know how to say it, Washtenaw County, right? That might be good. Is it Washtenaw? Yeah. Thank you for all your patience. I'll be sticking around for a bit before I figure out a way to get back to Ann Arbor. And thanks for coming here tonight.
You have the controller?
What?
Okay, how do you? Thank you, Elliot. By the way, I'm driving you back to Ann Arbor. Martin Luther King said, we must be radicals for love. So it's okay if we want to be radicals. Let me tell you a little bit about some of the things that you might do if you are so inclined and motivated by coming here tonight and listening to this conversation. First, this is the group that we have. There's no dues, there's no membership, there's just a mailing list and a core group to plan and make things happen. We work together to promote love, respect, and inclusion for people of all races in our community. Faith is our motivation. It's not our mission. We're not a religious group per se. We're a group of people of different faiths who come together, and what we want to do is address problems in our community. Our community has an image problem based on some very real history. So understanding that history and dealing with it, it's led us to the point today where we have 0.7% black people in this community, in this county. The counties around us, the 5 that touch us, that doesn't include Wayne County, have 14%. 20 times the diversity of black and white. And if you look at the Hispanic and Asian, you have great differences from our surrounding counties. So we suffer from that. We lose a lot from that. And we also don't follow the real core tenets of our faith. So that's our problem. What are some things we want to do about it? By the way, you can find out about our group just by going to the Livingston faithandraceproject.org. So just Google the name. So what are some things we're doing? We have an initiative, All Are Welcome Here initiative. We figure if we really believe that we love all people, let's say so. Let's say you're welcome here. And let's have our businesses say that. Let's have our government offices say that. Let's have our churches say that. In fact, I'm very pleased that Father Doug has a bunch of signs up around here. Pastor Ken, it's not Father Doug, it's Pastor Doug. We're coming together. And Pastor Ken has signs up in his church too. So if you think that you know a business or church or a government office that might want to put up a sign, there's some over here. They're free, and Diane Davison, one of our core group, will have one for you. If you decide you should stand up and walk together to show that you love all people, and there's more of us in the county than people might expect, especially if we can get a bunch of you to come next year, then please sign up tonight. We need to know who you are so we can tell you where we're going to meet once they establish the order and place of the parade arrangement. So Dennis Wagner is back there in the blue shirt. He's going to sign you up so that we know you're coming and we can tell you where we're going to meet. That's our 21 people last year. This isn't a faith and race project per se, but it's something we wanted to tell you about. It's a Juneteenth celebration at the First United Methodist Church in Brighton. And if you'd like to learn more about this, liturgical dance. Suzanne Everett in the back, holding that thing up, whatever she's holding up, it's the same thing. We'll tell you more about it. And if you'd like to hear more about how we got here today, I've written a book about it. It's called simply A Brief History of Race Relations in Livingston County, Michigan. I finished this about 4 years ago, and I've spoken about a dozen times. I'm going to speak 3 times this summer. Once at the Brighton Library on June 20th, and then July 15th at Chilson Hills Baptist Church, and then sometime later at Grace Lutheran, pastor in August. So June, July, and August, you'll have an opportunity to hear me give you the highlights of the book and some sense of how the forces around us influence the county. And if you'd like a copy of the book, my wife, who, oh, she's there. The books are sitting at that table over there next to Richard. They're on the seat. You can get a copy of the book. I ask that you pay me back what I paid to have it printed, which is $10. I can autograph them too. That increases their value at least 3 cents. All right. So again, what do we do? How will we do this work? Was a comment that someone said. We learn more. We read more. We're going to have a book club. It is going to have a formation meeting shortly, June 18th. And the first book is going to be James, which I've read. It's a great book. It's an easy read, but it's a real eye-opener to a lot of things that you might not realize. And Marta, in the back, she'll be telling you about that book club. If you'd like to join it or like to consider joining it, go talk to Marta. And we have some resources. We have these lovely shirts, that I'm modeling. It goes with a suit, or you can wear it with jeans. There's not much in a wardrobe that has that much flexibility. And my lovely assistant, Shirley, who's raising her hand, Shirley Ross, will give you a little flyer on how you can order one of these shirts from Spirit of Livingston right down the road. They're very affordable. And wear the message. Let people know that you think all should be welcome here. We also have started writing some stories. The first story is about Lulu Childers. In the 1890s, she graduated as valedictorian from Howell High School. She's a black woman. How about that? And she went on to become the founding dean of the School of Music at Howard University, one of the best universities in our country. The building of fine arts is named after her. I'm waiting for the statue to be put up in downtown Howell to recognize that history. But if you'd like to know a little more about her, come to our website and read that. Or if you have, some teachers that might want to use something like that in a classroom, tell them about it. So that's what we're up to right now, now and coming soon. But we're going to do more different things. We're going to try to build more understanding of how faith helps us to build a beloved community here in Livingston County. We've done some things like that in the past. There's an organization called Just Faith that Suzanne and I and Nicole Matthews-Creech, thank you, from the Diversity Council, co-facilitated a 9-week program that they put out. We've also brought the Conversations on Race program to the county. For 6 years, a group of people in Detroit have been facilitating conversations on race so people don't step on landmines and trigger one another to blow up and walk the room. They're very good. So those are the types of things we do there. We also want to support policies and candidates to support diversity, inclusion, and racism. You know, the kind of organization for justice that Elliot just described. And we want to better understand the diversity dividends. There's a great book called The Sum of Us that explains these dividends. And if we embrace love and inclusion, there will be great dividends for everyone, not just the people we love and want to include, but there will be social, cultural, economic, and even moral dividends. So, if you'd like to help us develop something like any of these, and I heard a lot of energy in some of the questions, maybe some of you would like to do that. I'll be over where this banner is, laying on the table over there, and if you'd like to sign that banner, that's another way of stepping up and putting your name down. Put your name down on that banner and say, I believe this, and I'm in on this. So come on over and talk to me about the core group, or just come and sign the banner. And finally, stay in touch. We've got a mailing list. 2/3 of the people that registered are not on our mailing list. So we'd like you to be on our mailing list. So there's some, are those sheets still out on the table, Ange? Okay, go out there and check off your name that you'd like to have. You got to sell books, Ange. Where are you going? So we can keep in touch with you. Things about our mailing list. We do not give it to anybody else. When I send a message, it will only show your name to the recipients. You all got one if you were registered for this today. And you'll only get 1 or 2 a month. Just what's coming up, what's new, what's coming down the pike. So please get on our mailing list so we can keep in touch with you. And then finally, looking out next year, here's another thing that United Methodist Church in Brighton is going to do. They're going to have a civil rights pilgrimage to Atlanta, Birmingham, Montgomery, Selma, and more. And I've been to 3 of the places that they're going to visit, and it'll knock your socks off. It'll make you cry. It'll make you angry. It'll make you want to do more. It'll make you understand better. So take a bus ride with them. So that's what we're doing. So finally, I want to thank Dr. Ratzman. I have a couple things for him. I know that you'll probably want to wear this around campus. Livingston Faith and Race Project. And I know that everyone in Ann Arbor likes Zingerman's. So here's now, finally, just in retrospect, I have been puzzling for weeks since I started a conversation with Elliot about how does he dance through this minefield of race and religion and politics and nationalism, and without stepping on the landmines. He must be extremely agile. And I found out, yes, he is. So he's an amazing guy. That came from the U of M magazine. Okay, so with that, we've got some coffee, both decaf and non-decaf, and homemade cookies that 3 of our core group have baked for you. And you've got a lot of new friends that you need to talk with, and sign up for some stuff. Get involved. Let's do the work. Thank you.